Welcome to our Tuesday, May 10th, regular closed session meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. Roll call, please, Madam Secretary.
Director McIntosh.
Here.
Director Millen.
Present.
Director Coleman.
Present.
Director Young.
I'm here.
Director Patterson.
Here.
Director Katz. President Lenny.
Here. All right, if members of the public are online and wish to make public comment, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Please refrain from providing personal information such as addresses or phone numbers during public comment. If we need this information, we will have you contact staff. The secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have the discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. The secretary will track time and inform each speaker when the allotted time has concluded. All right, do we have any speakers?
I have no raised hands on Zoom and nothing in the boardroom.
All right then. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. We will now convene to discuss closed session agenda items. We are scheduled to return for our regular board meeting at 1:15. Great, thank you. And welcome to Tuesday, May 10th, 2022 regular business meeting of the East Bay Mud Board of Directors. We will receive reports from this morning's Planning and Legislative Human Resources Committees under item 13. Roll call, please, Madam Secretary.
Director Coleman.
Present.
Director Katz.
Present.
Director Lenny.
Here.
President Lenny. Director McIntosh.
Here.
Director Millen.
Present.
Director Patterson. Director Young.
I'm here.
Great. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to All right, we start out with a presentation. Clifford, do you want to lead us in that?
Yes, I will do that right now. The National Association of Clean Water Agencies awarded the National Environmental Achievement Award in the Operations and Environmental Performance category to the district in recognition of its odor management program, which combines new technology with a back-to-basics approach. Over the past few years, the district has achieved a dramatic reduction in off-site odor reports attributable to the main wastewater treatment plant. Staff used a combination of strategic investments in capital upgrades coupled with low-cost, effective management techniques. Staff targeted the area of the treatment plant most proximate to residential neighborhoods, and the district spent millions of dollars to replace and upgrade the odor control system. This new facility utilizes 2-stage treatment with a biological filter followed by activated carbon. This one capital investment yielded significant results when coupled with low-cost operational changes. In addition, staff manages a 24/7 odor report hotline, and using information from the hotline adjusts operational practices and engages staff in a solutions-oriented odor management team. Staff also reinstituted the practice of daily odor patrols at the treatment plant. The odor patrols allow for immediate actions to be taken before an odor can migrate off-site. I'd like to thank all that contributed to this reduction in odor reports and recognize those that are here today to accept the award on their behalf. Maura Benarns, Senior Civil Engineer. Kevin Dickinson, Treatment Plant Superintendent. Artem Dianchenko, Laboratory Supervisor. Juan Herrera, Wastewater Shift Supervisor. Doug Higashi, Manager of Wastewater Engineering. Kevin Jim, Associate Civil Engineer. Raul Ruiz, Assistant Engineer. And Yun Shang, Manager of Laboratory and Technical Services. Please join me in congratulating staff for a job well done.
I just want to say I really appreciate all the work you've done. Of course, the wastewater treatment plant is in my district, and it's something that's very challenging to have our wastewater plant in such an urban area right around in West Oakland. We've established our West Oakland liaison group for it. But I want to say in the 20 years I've been on the board, I've never received a call from a constituent about odor. And that really says a lot, and I think that we have the odor control line. We get calls on that from time to time. But it's really been a magnificent job that you do that way. And I'm particularly proud of them for presenting this award. You? Pass it on.
Great job.
All right, there are no announcements required from closed session. We are on to public comment. These are comments for non-agenda items will be heard at the beginning of the meeting, and comments on agenda items will be heard when the item is up for consideration. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Please refrain from providing personal information such as addresses or phone numbers during public comment. If we need this information, we will have you contact staff. The secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have the discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. The secretary will track the time and inform each speaker when the allotted time has concluded.
So I currently have some hands for public comment, so.
All right, and these are for items that may be on agenda items and non-agenda items, but we want to
We'll
pick
find out.
the non-agenda items first.
Okay, Nick Lawrence, can you advise if you're talking about a non-agenda or agenda item, please?
I'm not sure whether it is an agenda item or not.
Okay, so you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and your time will start now.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Risha. Greetings, East Bay MUD employees, General Manager Chan, members of the board, legal department eavesdroppers, fire officials, posse members, the media, and concerned ratepayers. Welcome yet again to a dangerous condition of public property still existing on Tappan Terrace, Orinda, in the form of the still out of service East Bay MUD fire hydrant H14100, connected as it is to a tiny, inadequate 2-inch rubber hose for over 2 years. Nick Lawrence here with episode 17 titled, Where's the Water? Ratepayers paid for a working fire hydrant on Tappan Terrace, and Carlton Chan, he being General Manager Chan's own brother, promised it over a year ago, connected to an 8-inch supply. But then the whining began and stalls and delays and backsliding as Mr. Chan's 8-inch supply became described as an unacceptable 4-inch, providing only 25% of the flow capability of the promised supply. The stalling continued with claims that we need an easement, although no easement was sought for the 2-inch rubber hose. But the easements demanded by East Bay MUD have been fully executed 4 weeks ago in the form of a license agreement signed off by Mr. Elwadi of East Bay MUD. Yet the 2-inch rubber hose remains in place, endangering the community. USA has not even marked the area of construction as of yesterday. As an affected party, I am a beneficiary of the license agreement. It is evident from the many previous episodes here that the start date under the license agreement should be immediate. Therefore, I asked the board to explain why the work is not commenced and the 2-inch rubber hose removed and fire hydrant H14100 returned to service. Ratepayers just received the latest pipeline newsletter, and while the pipeline is silent on how many fire hydrants have been out of service, it does state when fire danger arises, and that would be like now, we will work to ensure that water never stops. But our fire hydrant is still connected to a totally inadequate 2-inch rubber hose. So we ask again, where's the water? East Bay MUD employees and posse members are invited to share their stories about their own experiences and customer experiences to me at East Bay MUD at NICKLAWRENCE.com. Tune in next meeting for episode 18 of A Dangerous Condition of Public Property as these stories unfold. We are on the official record and out of time. Thank you, Risha.
Okay, next up, we have Kelly A. Are you speaking on an agenda or non-agenda item?
Okay, non-agenda. A month ago, the California State Water Resources Control Board issued a report on how rates are set. And as it turns out, you know, in the water business, everybody gets fixated on the fixed charges, and then they throw in the variable costs, and they like to keep those two very separate. Well, the State Water Board, they looked at it, they brought in economists who look at it from the point of view of your customers. Your customers just pay one price, and they actually, you know, a small user pays about 1.25 times more per unit. 1.25 times more per unit than a large customer does. And a small customer is 6 units per month. A large customer is 24 units per month. The large customer is in the top 5 or 10% of your customer base, and the 6 units per month is a little bit, maybe your 50th percentile median customer, maybe a little bit less. So that's a very typical customer. So basically, you're giving out volume discounts. Now, what's interesting about this is that they actually compared it with 300 other agencies in the state. And, you know, people, a lot of the liberals, you know, I kind of have I have some familiarity. I don't live in Berkeley, but, or Oakland, but I kind of know how those, I have a natural affinity for all those people, and they really hate it when you give out volume discounts. So as it turns out, your agency is actually on the lower end of this. So you don't give out as much of a volume discount as the other agencies. They actually have a histogram for this. You're near the end of more equitable pricing, less volume discount. A typical agency charges 1.9 times more for a small customer compared to a big customer. And some of the other agencies in the Bay Area are around 1.5 times more. So you're way down at 1.25 times more. So you can pat yourselves on the back for having more equitable pricing, less of a volume discount. You do give out volume discounts to large users, but it's not atypical, and there are very few agencies in California that don't have a volume discount. You know, everyone pretends they're not doing that. Almost everybody is doing that, almost every agency. And when it comes, as the drought proceeds, you know, these kind of economic ways of looking at it you need to be thinking more about the economics of your pricing, and drought surcharges. I heard several members of your board very reluctant to even think about drought surcharges. But I'm sure that you'll come around as political circumstances change. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
And I have no other hands raised for public comment.
All right.
One hand just came up. This is for Yvette Rivera. You should be able to unmute yourself, and your 3 minutes will start now.
Thank you, Risha. I'm sorry I missed the morning meeting. I had some technical difficulties. But I do want to talk about 2 public comments that were made this morning at the HR and legislative meeting. One was by Ross Spinner. He works at the district. He's been here for 11 years. He talked about his experience at East Bay MUD and how he was subjected to harassment and bullying, and how he was coming to the board and will come to future meetings, which is amazing, to speak about wanting to change the culture of the harassment and bullying that happens to new employees during their probation. Mr. Spinner is a white male. I want the board to consider what it's like for people of color to come to the district and to be subjected to bullying and harassment during their probationary period. A lot of people don't belong to the Nepotism Academy or the good old white boys academy. And all they want to do is come to the district and earn their keep and learn their job and do well. And I'm just really amazed that Mr. Spinner came and spoke, and I was very moved by what he said. Mr. Kelly Abred spoke about the state auditor's report. At first, I thought he was talking about an article that was in the Los Angeles Times about the Metropolitan Water District in Southern California. They were found to have racial discrimination, sex harassment, and retaliation as problems in their agency. And the state auditor's report issued a 100-page document. Because Mr. Albrecht spoke this morning, that's the only reason I found out about that report. I sent that report to the district. I hope that the district, the East Bay MUD board members really listened to what Mr. Albrecht had to say, because to everybody else, other than probably this board at East Bay MUD, we see the writing on the wall. That report talked about their failures. One of their failures that I hope comes to light here at the district, and I'm going to just read this one line, is that water district also failed to establish an independent ethics office capable of investigating violations of policy, including by members of the agency's board of directors, according to the auditors. I'm going to stop there because I want to end this by just talking shortly about Justin Phillips' article in the San Francisco Chronicle this past weekend on Sunday. The article was called East Bay MUD Utility District Faces More Racism Charges. And it was issued on May 1st. And because people don't get the paper anymore, they just look at things electronically, I did send the article as a PDF
Please
to the district.
try to wrap up. You're at 3 minutes.
Thank you. This morning, Mr. Spinner spoke for 5. I couldn't get on this morning, so I hope I can just finish my point here. I want you to consider, given that Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland have this new lawsuit, and Mr. Justin Phillips' article referenced the McIntosh case from many years ago and how there are similarities. I want the district to consider why Saji Pierce, a well-respected brown Asian woman that had 18 years at the district, isn't sitting in that East Bay MUD General Counsel seat. Was it because she wasn't mentored like Craig Spencer's protege that is now sitting in that seat? Is it because of discrimination, or maybe because of racial bias? I don't know, but we're going to find out in March 2023, because there's going to be a trial, and hopefully all of the evidence will come out to light. Thank you. I yield.
All right, any other speakers?
There are no other hands raised.
All right. That ends our public comment. We're on to the consent calendar. Items 1 through 6, are any items to be pulled for the consent calendar for discussion?
Move the consent calendar. I'll second.
All right. Moved by Director McIntosh, seconded by Director Young. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Carries unanimously. We're now on to determination and discussion. General Manager Chan will lead this.
Thank you, President Lenny. So I've been asked to pull item 7 and carry it over to the May 24th meeting. So we'll move on directly to the legislative update. And Marlene Domain will provide the update.
Good afternoon. You didn't see my scramble. I hope everybody is well. We had a discussion of the Ledge report in this morning's Ledge HR committee. And what I'd like to suggest that we do this afternoon is focus on, there are 3 bills that are fairly complicated and may take some conversation. And so what I'd like to do is do kind of a high level on those that are not these 3, If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them, but then focus on the three more complex bills. So with that, I'll start and pause for questions. The first measure is AB 2026. This is Assemblymember Friedman's plastic packaging bill. We're recommending a support. This is very similar to a measure that the board supported last year, and it is about phasing out that plastic, single-use plastic packaging in things that you're getting online. So, Amazon deliveries, et cetera. It would also reinstate the plastic bag recycling points at large retailers. So for example, like what you see at a grocery store, that's sunsetted. That would just put that back in law. We're recommending a support. Next measure, this is one of the three of the more complicated measures. This is AB 2419. This is Brian's.
Marlene, President Lenny had a question.
On the plastic
Yeah.
one, I was just, again, curious. So this is the what do they call it? Padded envelopes that now use plastic bubble.
Exactly.
Those types of things, right?
E-
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, sure. AB 2419, this is Assemblymember Brian's Justice 40 initiative. And we are recommending a support in concept on this measure. This is a measure that Director Young brought to our attention in March. And it's a big bill, very consistent with a lot of the work EBMUD is doing in its own service area. It's intended to really focus on the state implementation of the federal executive order, Justice 40, that President Biden put in place a year ago, January. The overall executive order is saying that for certain federal funds, 40% of those benefits should accrue to disadvantaged communities. What this bill would do is mirror that. 40% of certain federal funds, the benefits should accrue to disadvantaged communities. On top of that, an additional 10% of federal fund benefits, so additional funds, should benefit to low-income households and communities. This would also establish an oversight committee at the state level with reporting responsibilities, and that committee would be appointed by the governor and the Senate and the Assembly. Why are we recommending a support in concept as opposed to a full support? A couple of reasons. One is this is very much a work in progress. We expect this bill is going to morph over the next few months. There's some federal implementation that is not final yet. The guidance is out in draft form. Final is not out. There's a federal screening tool that's also not final yet. We expect those to inform this bill at least somewhat. Also, there are ongoing conversations predominantly at the member level in the legislature on the definition of disadvantaged community. The definition that this bill would use for that 40% benefit piece is CalEnviroScreen. And that definition has sorry, I'm losing my words right now. It has an income piece and it has a pollution piece. So it's very well suited for an urban area, much like EBMUD's service area. Where it may not work so well is when they get outside, like the northern part of the state, where it's very rural, it's very sparsely populated. And when you're looking at categories as broad as this bill, it goes beyond water and wastewater, climate change, clean energy, transportation, housing. They're trying to find a definition that will not leave a community behind. That 10% piece that gets to low-income households and low-income communities is a nod in that direction. We don't know yet is where they're going to land on that final overall picture of how to define benefiting communities for both pieces of the bill. And then lastly, I alluded to it just a moment ago, there are quite a few areas in the bill that are really outside of our particular area. So it would apply to funding for water and wastewater. It would apply to funding for climate change, clean energy, energy efficiency, clean transportation, affordable and sustainable housing, training and workforce development, remediation and reduction of legacy pollution, and also the water and wastewater infrastructure. Again, we think this bill is very consistent with the work that EBMUD is doing. We'd like to come in with a positive, supportive position, but also to recognize that it's a work in progress.
Marlene, this is Director Young. What's the source of Aqua's opposition?
My understanding, yeah, it's the disadvantaged community definition, and it's those the small water agencies sort of in Northern California concerned about potential impacts. I think it's a oppose unless amended as opposed to a straight oppose, but nonetheless, that's
okay.
That's the source. Any other questions on this one? Okay, the next bill is AB 2639. This is Assemblymember Quirk's bill on the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. We are recommending an oppose unless amended on this measure. And this measure was brought to you in March as an information item. And at that point, we wanted to make you aware that we had concerns with the measure. We've had conversations directly with the member and with staff, trying to get to a happy place on the bill. And so far, our core issue has not been addressed. Before I get into the meat of the bill, I also want to draw your attention to the support opposition list. This is unusual for us to be recommending a negative position on a bill with this kind of a support opposition list. But I think there are, our basis is procedural versus more of a philosophical basis for a lot of the positions that you see. So with that, I'll walk you through it and, of course, answer questions. On the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, there are two phases. There is phase 1, which is the San Joaquin and its tributaries, and there's phase 2, which is Sacramento. Essentially, that includes the McCollum River. They're in two different places in this water quality control plan process at the State Water Board. The overall objective of this bill is to speed up that process under the understanding that it's taken quite a lot of time for this process to be completed, and we're not there yet. The first part of the bill pertains to phase 2, and it would require the State Water Board to adopt its final update by December 31st of 2023. So that would be the final update that is the plan of how this would look for the Sacramento River and its tributaries, including the McCollum River. The second part applies to phase 1, and it would require the State Water Board to implement phase 1 by that same date through regulation or other appropriate implementation methods. That is really important. When you implement these plans, it gets into modifying water rights. The basis of our objection here is a precedent of modifying water rights through a regulation. It basically eliminates due process. And if it's done for phase 1, it would likely happen for phase 2, which would mean for the McCollum, we would lose our ability to have that due process. associated with a change in our water rights. That's the core of how we function. This would be a new, very big precedent, very, very concerning. That is the core of our oppose unless amended recommendation. The third piece of the bill is that it would prohibit the State Water Board from approving a new water right permit if those above dates, those December dates of 2023 are not met. For example, a groundwater storage project would not be able to get permitted under this. So the obligations would fall on water rights permit holders rather than the State Water Board for the State Water Board not meeting the deadlines. And the result of these deadlines being imposed would really be harming the integrity of the state water rights process and potentially erode our own water rights. The opposition on this, or the support on this, really is about the time. They'd like to see it sped up, and this bill is an attempt to do that. We have ideas on ways to speed it up that preserve the integrity of the process. We would like to continue to work with the author to try to find a happy place where we feel comfortable with protecting our water rights, and also that this process could get expedited a little bit, but we're certainly not there yet. But that is why we're recommending an oppose unless amended and not a straight oppose.
Who's the bill sponsor? Is it PCL or?
I'm going to say yes and no. This came from the PCL report. This certainly is an author-driven bill. Any other questions? Okay.
I just wanted to point out here, obviously, it seems like all the environmental groups are on one side and the water buffaloes are on the other.
What do we consider, Doug?
We're considered the in-betweens.
Yeah.
The water goats. Have you've had conversations, I assume, with the environmental community? They've reached out to me, said this is, our proposed amendments would gut the purpose of the bill, which puts us at pretty close to loggerheads there. Is there a position that we could find that could be a compromise on it? Do you see?
Yeah, I hope so. It's a tough one. Yeah, there have been a lot of delays here in getting this plan done, and there are processes still happening. I think this bill is not focused on those processes, and there are different opinions on those external processes that are happening. I would like to say that we could find a place, but at the same time, it's a tough recommendation for us to bring to you with this support opposition list. But because we're getting at that due process, if we can't come to agreement on that due process piece, we may not be able to find a path that the environmental community accepts.
And if we take a position, remind me, oppose unless amended, we're essentially, there's a letter of oppose. We go onto the opposition list.
We do. And depending on how the committees operate, some committees, when they publish those official lists, will give you an oppose unless amended and an opposed list. Others just lump them together. But what it does allow us to do is try to find a path, work on that path forward. I'm sorry, my camera just went off. That was my fault. There we go. Try to find that path forward. And if we were able to get there, then we would go neutral. If it was a sufficiently wonderful compromise, we would come back to you with another position recommendation. But the short answer to your question is yes, it would put us on that opposition side.
All right, thank you.
And if we don't take a position, I'm sorry, I'm on mute. If we don't take a position, at this point, but continue to engage, that's also an opportunity, right? If we're still in play.
It is, and we're getting into second house time on the bill. And for a lot of bills, that would be a comfortable place for us. We've really thought about this one because it is such a core component of our ability to operate our water rights. That's why we're recommending the position now, to be able to go into that second house and say, hey, this is a utility that is always looking for that path. We want to be constructive. We try. This is unacceptable. We cannot give up our due process rights. It's signaling the seriousness of the issue.
Doug, thank you, Marlene. This is a difficult decision for the district. I understand that, and I think you've weaved it together pretty good considering everything. I know some of us have relationships with Bill. I go back to when he was on the Hayward City Council a long time ago. And if maybe the individuals up here who have those relationships can talk to Bill as this bill processes. I know you've not had success. I know NACWA people have not had success. But maybe the personal relationships going back 20 plus years with that some of us have with Mr. Quirk may help move the needle a little bit. So I mean, I would be willing to, if it's helpful, and perhaps other board members too who have that relationship.
Any other comments? All right.
Okay, and thank you, Director Coleman. The next bill is AB 2895, and this is Mr. Arambula's bill on temporary water transfers. This is another one where we are recommending an oppose unless amended. This bill is intended by the author's statement to streamline the process to get those temporary change orders processed with the State Water Board to facilitate those short-term water transfers. The type of transfer I'm talking about are the types of transfers we rely on in drought as a supplemental supply. So it's the transfers where we're looking for a time period of less than a year. For EBMUD, we generally don't have a sense of the hydrology until springtime to be able to say, okay, there's going to be water available. We need to get moving. We need to get this petition into the State Water Board. It goes through an effectively streamlined process that's intended to be streamlined so that they can be approved and the transfer can be completed in that short period when water is available and when it's needed. So the intent is to streamline that process. The way the bill's written, it would actually do the opposite. It would bog down the process to the point that it could make it impossible to get a petition through and approved in time to complete a transfer. So what it would do, there are three main things. One is it would add a requirement, that consultation with Department of Fish and Wildlife be concluded and submitted as part of the petition to the State Water Board. What's required now is when the petition is submitted to the State Water Board, that a copy is given to Fish and Wildlife so that Fish and Wildlife can comment while the State Water Board is evaluating. So if they want to comment, there's space for them to do it. They're not required to comment, but they can. So it's a parallel process designed to move quickly. What this bill would do is, instead of making it parallel, it would separate it out. You have to go to Fish and Wildlife first. They have to respond. It's no longer permissive. They have to do it. And then you have to document that consultation and put it with your petition And that consultation has to be complete before you can submit that petition. So you've just added that consultation time on top. The second thing it would do is establish a pre-notice process. And this is an optional process, would be, and it would allow agencies to submit to the State Water Board notice that they're going to submit a petition later. That notice would be due by January 31st. That would allow the State Water Board to plan their time better because they would have a sense of what petitions were coming. The benefit of doing that is you get 10 less days in processing time for the State Water Board to get the petition processed, and the hearing requirements stay relatively streamlined if a hearing is required. The issue with that process is January 31st is too early for many, many entities to know if water is going to be available, if there's going to be a transfer. So this easily will attract speculative petitions or notices that happen in January. Those notices have to go through a separate public comment period. So they've added a workload to the State Water Board with these notices and a public comment period. And then it's basically a false workload, because if you don't know the hydrology, you don't know if there's going to be a transfer, file a notice to get a place in line, and then no notice materializes. And then those like EBMUD that don't know the hydrology until May are coming in to a process that is already bogged down. And it becomes questionable whether there would be resources to process those applications in a timely fashion. The last thing it would do is remove the newspaper noticing requirement. That is the one piece of this bill that is looked at as potentially helpful. It just speeds things up a little bit and recognizes today's world in terms of how noticing is happening. We are recommending an oppose unless amended on this one as well, because it has the potential to directly affect our ability to get transfer water during droughts. And the amendments, I should have mentioned that, the amendments that we're suggesting are on page 16 of the bill. And it's basically recommending that they go back to existing law on the non-pre-notice process, and that the pre-notice process be modified in a way that would not impact those that are not using the pre-notice process. That's sort of the theme. And one last point, the support opposition list on this one, remarkably light. The reason for that, from the conversations that we've been having, is most people have been trying to figure the bill out first, and then secondly, trying to understand, can it be fixed? And it's just taken a lot of entities time to fully understand what this bill is doing. So we do expect to see more people coming on board with positions in the coming weeks. Any questions? Okay, the next bill is SB 1392. This is Senator McGuire's bill to extend the Steelhead Report Restoration Card Program. That is in place now. It would extend it through the end of 2027. It's a positive program. It's something that provides funding, grant funding for habitat work. EBMUD would certainly have eligibility on the McCollum River. I note that this also is under discussion as potentially being included in the budget as well. And we are recommending a support on this. All right, next up are the validation bills. We've grouped these together, SB 1490, 1491, and 1492. These are the annual validations that backstop actions of local agencies, basically protect us against inadvertent errors or omissions. And we're recommending a support on this. And lastly is a federal bill, S 3956. This is the the Senate counterpart to the House bill that you adopted a support position on in March. It is the WIPES Act, and this would be creating a national standard for the labeling of non-flushable wipes, and requiring a grant program, and setting fines for non-compliance. And we're recommending a support. And that's the end of my report.
The Legislative Human Resources Committee met this morning, and as to the 5 bills, AB 2026, AB 2419, AB 2895, and SB 1392, we supported unanimously staff's recommendation. I believe it was AB 2639 that we simply received the report. Is that correct, John?
No, we supported that motion.
Okay. And as to the 4 validation bills, we also supported staff's recommendation, all unanimous.
Can I ask that, whoops. Can I ask that we consider AB 2639, we vote on AB 2639 separately and by roll call?
All right, so are you moving?
I'll move the
rest
rest,
of the bills?
staff's recommendation on the rest, but I'd like to have 2639 be voted separately.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Director Young, seconded by Director Coleman. For all support of staff positions or staff recommendations on all bills except for AB 2639. Do you want roll call on?
No, we don't need a roll
Okay.
call now.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, carries unanimously. 2639.
I'll move that with the understanding that it's a roll call vote.
All right, we have a motion by Director Coleman, seconded by Director Mellon. Any discussion on that?
I would, I'm planning to abstain. I find this to be very difficult to parse, and I'm, not thrilled with the way that it's, presented as a, by the author, from a process standpoint. Instead of being the scientist that he is, from the science perspective of restoring fisheries, and so leaving no latitude. On the other hand, this has been a quagmire forever, and appreciate the intentions of those who are supporting this to have a more determined process when when so much is at stake. And I'm not clear this is it, but I don't know that putting us on the opposition side actually gives us the leverage that to influence the outcome. And I get what Marlene is saying about moving to the second house and needing to decide where we stand, but
And Marguerite,
Yeah.
we did discuss this morning briefly, albeit oppose unless amended versus support if amended. But staff maintains that this is the best position.
yeah, I understand that.
Because then we would go on, mostly look like the support list in the same way, right? That we look like the opposed list here. Yeah, Andy.
I also, share the concerns about just the support list. Are organizations that we would ordinarily want to work with, would normally want to align with, and share many points of agreement in terms of the the big picture for long-term sustainability of the Bay Delta. However, the amendments that staff are recommending are pertinent, they're precise, they are workable, and I think very reasonable to be advocating for. I think it's ordinarily something that would go without saying because of the professionalism of our staff, but I think it would help to be able to confirm the sequence that we would approach the author, approach key leaders in the support community to re-review our concerns before we issue a formal oppose unless amended letter, the lengths that we would go to educate the committee consultant, that we respectfully request that their format include the parentheses of unless amended in the analysis to make clear that we're being very limited in what we're opposing, that there are these procedural aspects, and we are not seeking to get in the way of much of what the bill is seeking to do substantively. Some bills are complicated and have a lot going on, and this is one where many of the objectives of the Planning and Conservation League, written in a policy paper, I think did in their report, are goals that we would not oppose and indeed support. And so I think if our letter is communicating what, from PCL's vision and the author's vision we agree with, in that same letter where we're, opposing very specific things in the bill and seeking to have those amended for our neutrality and maybe considering support, we haven't had that analysis yet, then that's a approach that I could be supportive of, but I think our staff report is very helpful for the board to understand that the reasons why it's reasonable to raise these concerns with the legislature.
Any other comments? I would just add to both my colleagues who have spoken here that I'm feeling uncomfortable at this point in being on the opposition side on record. I would prefer that we continue to communicate the amendments that we need to be in support of this legislation, and that and for that reason I'll be voting against this particular position, but open to having it brought back again.
Okay.
It might make sense just not to vote on this at all at this meeting and allow staff some more time to do its thing. Just a suggestion.
Well, we don't have.
We have a motion and a second.
Do we
right now.
need authorization from the board to communicate a concerns position? That doesn't mean very much when it gets to a committee, but if there's no committee hearing set yet, what's the?
I assume we've communicated these amendments to the author. Is that correct? In some
Yes.
sort of form.
Yes, we have met directly with the author. We have met with staff. We've been in very close communication. This is an author we like to work with. He's part of our delegation. There's a lot here, but there's just an unwillingness to move at all, and just a desire to kind of impose some hard deadlines that frankly were pulled from a PowerPoint presentation. So yeah, we have been in communication. Will we get anywhere else with communication without a position? Frankly, I doubt it, but always willing to try and want to do what you as a board are the most comfortable with, and we will do that.
Well, I certainly would be willing to take up John's suggestion and also contact the author and speak with him about it.
Potentially some of the bill supporters that are so that they understand very clearly our concerns and our position, our, the uncomfortable position we are in with this particular topic, in general, right? I mean, we're not happy with the way the process is going either.
Doug, if I may?
Yes, go ahead, John.
So Marlene, quick question to you, based on what Lisa asked. Is there a time frame which this letter needs to be in, oppose unless amended or whatever? Is there a set time frame that we need to act by for you from a negotiating standpoint?
Well, I'm getting all waffly now. The reason I'm just thinking about process right now. We could put this off till June. It gives us less time with an official position to say, hey, we're not kidding here. We're very, very serious. This is important. That would still give us time in the second house, however, in June, to work the bill with an official position. So I would not want to wait until August. That's the last month. And then you get where were you? This bill's been out the whole time. So there's an element of being respectful to the author in working with them, but also not coming in with a late official position. So.
Thank you for that response. I guess based on what we've heard up here, everybody needs to vote their conscience on this, obviously. And, again, if Doug and I and whomever can talk with Bill Quirk about this, that would be great if that helps move the needle. But I don't want to take away the negotiating stance that you need dealing with him. And normally we support all Assemblyman Quirk's legislation that deals with issues related to us. I don't think we've opposed anything, to my knowledge, since he's been in the Assembly. I guess I'm still supporting oppose unless amended, with clearly conveyed to Mr. Quirk, we'd like to move it, but until the amendments are seriously addressed and adopted, we can't, from a process standpoint and the impact to our operations. And maybe he needs to see that from one of his agencies that has always been there to support his issues, for him to actually say, okay, maybe I need to revisit this a little bit, or maybe I need to think about it differently. And I suspect even some of the people who are supporting AB 2639, who we normally worked with, would understand our situation and position. And quite frankly, I'll be honest, some of those agents, some of those entities who are supporting AB 2639 are not there for us on the voluntary agreements issues that we're facing, even though they know very well we have been operating the McCollum River in a very positive way compared to most systems in the state. And I find that a little discouraging too.
So it sounds like, Marlene, it's fine if we don't vote on it today.
But it takes away our negotiating position.
I think,
That's not what she said.
Maybe I
She said as
misunderstood her.
long as it's before
August?
or by June, correct, Marlene?
Yeah, we could put this to June if that is a more comfortable
I
place.
misunderstood her.
I mean, you could also, though we have our HR committee meeting in the first meeting of the month, there's nothing that would prevent this from being brought back 2 weeks from now if you make, it's like put it as a, priority to make, look, our board, and then we could say, our board really debated this. We're, really uncomfortable with where this is at. We're gonna make a decision, I don't know if there's some help that gives to bring it back in 2 weeks versus waiting a whole month. I don't know.
Hey, we can work with whatever, and absolutely, I would use it to our advantage.
I think it would be helpful, and I'd like staff's feedback on whether it would be helpful to take a board vote that takes a position of seeking amendments and ratifying the amendments in the 3 bullet points in our memo. And that would allow clarity to the author, clarity to the environmental community that may be engaging in this bill. The amendments that the board has considered, it's not just coming from staff, it's coming from the board. We're behind those amendments, but it balances that certainty with courtesy to the author and the community. That I think that would strike a balance compared to taking no action today, and that may provide some runway. And I do agree that we do not need to reconsider this in committee, and it could be directly at the board in 2 weeks.
So are you making a substitute motion?
I'll make a substitute motion to take a position of seek amendments with the 3 bullet points that are listed on page 11 of the memo in item number 8.
I would second that.
Well, what I'll do is I'll withdraw my motion. How's that?
Would you like to be the seconder of the motion that I made?
I think Marguerite already did it.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm happy to withdraw my second if you would like to, John.
Okay.
All right, sounds like we have a motion then, as described by Andy, motion made by Andy, described by him, seconded by Director Coleman. Any further discussion? Is that a roll call vote, or?
I don't know if it's up to Andy.
Sounds
I
like-
don't need it to be a
I'm
roll
not
call
calling
vote
for a roll call
anymore.
vote.
Like we're
If
we're
it seems like we have
pretty much
consensus
all there.
for this particular
All right.
discussion today.
all in favor? Say
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously. Thank you, Marlene.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Marlene. Next is a report and setting of the public hearing to consider revisions to the water and wastewater system non-Prop 218 rates, charges, and regulations. And Sophia Skoda, Director of Finance, has a brief presentation to begin the discussion.
Janetta is, oh yeah, the microphone's on now, okay. All right, so the item that we have before us right now, item 9, is setting the stage for the next meeting where we'll be coming forward with the actual Proposition 218 rates, non-Proposition 218 rates and charges. So this is sort of setting the background and making sure that we're here to set the hearing. So next slide. So items 9 and 10 today that are before you involve rates and charges overall. And by way of background, last year we went through our biennial budget process and went through a Proposition 218 process for both years fiscal years 22 and fiscal years 23. So we sent those notices out in April of 2021. We held a public hearing on June the 8th of 2021. And we adopted our Proposition 218 rates and charges and fees on June 8th, the day of the public hearing. And the FY22 rates became effective on July the 1st of last summer. So since then, the board has declared a stage 2 drought. So what that means is that in our Proposition 218 rates and charges, we adopted drought surcharges. And so today, when we move on to item 10, we'll be discussing a recommendation for a stage 2 drought surcharge. At this point, however, barring any other change, the FY23 Proposition 218 rates would go into effect on July 1 of this year, so this summer. So next slide. So when we look at the non-218 rates, the actions that we have to take are 1, a filing of a staff report, and this is the report that we're filing today, which contains the recommendation of the general manager for revisions to the water and wastewater system schedule of rates and charges and other fees not subject to Proposition 218. So trip charge fees, all of those kinds of things, and also changes to regulations. So in order to do that, we have to hold a public hearing. And so we are asking that the board set a public hearing date of Tuesday, June the 14th. And so that's during your regular meeting, and you would consider the report and recommendation that we are filing with you today. I also want to note that we are having an upcoming board workshop, and that will take place on May the 24th. And we'll be covering some revisions to the KPIs in our strategic plan, as well as going over the recommended FY23 budget and associated rates. And that will include, of course, the drought costs that we'll be covering as part of item 10. So again, the public hearing and adoption of our non-218 rates, we're recommending that you set that date for June the 14th. Next slide. So we're not going to go into detail today, but what we would be covering at the next meeting are some of the details around the proposed updates. And these are essentially updates for our costs, for the fact that salaries have changed. Perhaps in some cases, the amount of time that it takes to do something might have been shifted. And so these are the fees that we're talking about and the schedule that it's associated with. So again, things like charges for special services, which would include the trip charges that we talked about, hydrant meters, those types of things. You'll see there costs for installation of fire services, main extension charges, standard participation charge. So those are the properties that were subject to charges before we had a system capacity fee. And then there are the system capacity fee charges themselves as well, which went through a major renovation last year. So moving on to the next slide. Just because there wasn't enough space, there's a couple more on here. So Public Records Act fee schedule, going all the way through the wastewater department capacity fees as well. Moving on to the next slide. There are some changes to our water service regulations, mainly definitional changes, some things like that. One in section 3, one in section 4, and one in section 15. Next slide. So this just covers, again, the next steps. So we will be back. We're going to go over item 10 now. And then we're going to be considering during item 10 the stage 2 drought surcharge, which if depending on the level at which the board put it into place, if it were 0, obviously it wouldn't go into effect. If it were any number other than 0, it would go into effect on July the 1st of this year. Again, we'll be having our mid-cycle budget and rates workshop on May the 24th. And then, assuming the board sets the public hearing date on our non-Prop 218 rates and charges, that would be on June the 14th. And also at that point would be considering adoption affirmation of our budget, our mid-cycle budget, and any all water, wastewater rates and drought surcharges, so rates that have already been noticed under Prop 218, and any decisions made about implementation of drought surcharge would go into effect on July 1. So a lot of dates, a lot of moving pieces, but just want to make sure that that you have all of that, and ask for a decision for a hearing date to be set. Thank you.
Discussion? All right, there's no vote on this, is that correct?
No, we have to vote to set the dates.
Set the dates, okay. All right, set a hearing. All right. I have a motion?
So moved.
All right, motion by Director Mellon, second by Director McIntosh. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you.
So at the last board meeting with the declaration of the stage 2 drought, we discussed implementing a drought surcharge to help recover some of our drought related costs. Today, we'll present that drought budget that Sophia just spoke about, summarizing our drought costs and our recommendation to implement an 8% drought surcharge. So Sophia, would you like to provide the presentation?
I would. So we're now on item 10, and we are pulling up the presentation that goes along with item 10. And the title of this item is Implement Stage 2 Drought Surcharge. Thank you. So going over the agenda briefly, what we're going to do is to review our 218 adopted stage system of drought rates. And this is something, we'll go over this, but that the district kind of socialized with our ratepayers in the 2014 time period, adopted in 2015, was at NACWA last week, and this was being discussed during one of the finance sessions as kind of a best practice now in California. I believe this is something that really the district created, this stage system of drought rates, and so it was very affirming to hear people talking about it as really a best practice around drought management. We'll also update our drought costs and go over what the impacts are of the calls for mandatory conservation, water conservation, and go over our funding plan for our costs and what we have in our cost of service at this point. We'll also review the proposed implementation of an 8% FY23 Stage 2 drought surcharge, and we're going to review the drought surcharge impacts as well as review a survey of other drought surcharges that are in our region. I do want to note at this point, this is a legal note, that we have already adopted staged drought surcharges, and so the decision is really how the board wishes to implement the Stage 2 surcharge based on current conditions. So we already have drought surcharges, and the question is how do we want to implement them? So if we look at this slide over here, it shows in Schedule L that there is an already existing maximum applicable drought surcharge. So Stage 1, 0, Stage 2, 0 to 8, Stage 3 up to a 20%, and Stage 4 up to a 25%. So just, again, being clear that these were adopted as part of our 218 process last year. Moving on to our next slide. Going over an overview of this drought surcharge process, again, adopted in 2015 originally, readopted in 2017, and then again reaffirmed as part of our biennial rate process last year, was noticed in our 218 as part of the 22-23 rate processes. So again, while the surcharges are approved, the steps that are required before any kind of a surcharge would be implemented are threefold. So one, the board would need to declare a stage, and in this case, the board has declared a Stage 2 drought on April 26th. Two, staff has to update our drought-related costs and prepare a drought budget with the expected financial implications, and so we're here today with that. And then the third, the board would have to authorize the implementation of the surcharge at a given percentage consistent with the drought budget that the board is presented with. So in 2015, we went ahead and put together a cost of service study that established this stage system of drought rates and the methodology that kind of backed it up. And we talked a little bit about that at our last meeting. And as I had said, it does require that we update drought costs and present those to the board, and analysis of any of the conservation impacts, as well as what the sources of funding are expected to be given current conditions before implementing any surcharge. So we are limited, of course, to the maximum that's specified in Schedule L that we just looked at. And again, as a reminder, the surcharge is a percentage, and it's adopted on all total water flow. Of course, that's potable water flow. And in this case, given the Stage 2 declaration, the maximum is at 8%. So now let's cover the actual drought costs that we see at this point. So the district is hoping to purchase up to 40 TAF, 1,000 acre feet of supplemental supply. The anticipated cost of that is $21.9 million, so $22 million. An additional $4 million is anticipated for treatment and storage-related costs. And then the district is also hoping to buy an additional TAF, pending availability. So the 40 TAF that we're talking about is 30 TAF of spring CVP and 10 TAF of placer, and then another 10 TAF contingent on where it's available and where we can get it from and how we get it to our system. There's also about $2 million of customer support and outreach, and we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about where that's coming from. And then there is the reality that since we are asking for conservation, that there are funds, revenue that we will not be receiving, and so that's anticipated at about $31 million. In terms of the funding and where we're expecting that to come from, $30.8 million would come from an 8% surcharge at our assumed levels of water sales if that were to be imposed during the whole year. Of course, as the board noted at the last meeting where we discussed this item, staff would be coming back to you in the fall to see where things are and to see about the necessity of a continued drought surcharge so that you could continue to monitor that one way or another. We are proposing at this point that we would use reserves to cover other costs, including the operating costs that would no longer be covered by water revenue from water sales. And so the anticipated use of those reserves is around $34 million. So when we look at the drought costs, the sort of drought budget, if you will, of $64.5 million, again, broken out in a more itemized fashion, you can see here the supplemental supply costs at 31.4, the customer service and public outreach costs for 9 limited term drought related positions in both customer service and public affairs, and funds for advertising as well at about $2 million. And then again, the operating costs of conservation, in that those are revenues that are not coming in any longer, at $31 million. Yes. The revenue that we're projecting would be if the surcharge were in effect for a full year. So if the district made the decision to say, hey, you know what, we don't need to buy any water. We had massive rains starting in October. We're pulling it off right now. Whatever that date is, then obviously the revenue that would be brought in would be less. So, you have to make a projection based on some assumption. And so the assumption in place here shows it in place for a full year.
Yes, looking at the previous chart, or yeah, thank you. So the supplemental supply costs are $30 million. The amount that we would use reserves, basically the amount recovered by the drought surcharge is $30 million. So essentially, under this scenario, the money for the surcharge would pay for the extra water, and the money from the reserve would pay for the water conservation.
Correct.
It's an easy way to explain it to
Yes,
folks.
yes, that's an easy way to explain it. So in other words, we are not collecting for the surcharge revenues that we are not collecting because you're conserving water.
Right. You use less water, we're not charging you for that.
That's exactly right.
We're charging you for the additional water. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
So again, the proposal today is for implementation of an 8% drought surcharge that would become effective on July 1. Again, assessed only on potable water flow charges, not on any of our other charges, such as elevation surcharge, non-potable water, or the monthly service charge. And as I had stated, we are currently assuming 12 months of collection, but again, we'll be coming back to the board to provide updates on where we are. If water supply conditions improved, the recommendation is that the surcharge, of course, could be suspended early or reduced depending on what those conditions are. Staff does not at this point recommend postponing the start of the drought surcharge. Part of it's because the purchase of the water and the costs that we'll be incurring are going to be starting now, and we are already using reserves to fund the revenue that we will not be collecting as a result of the anticipated reductions in demand. At this point, if you were to look at what are the actual impacts to a bill, we have here the range of customer bills that we've been showing for a number of years now, the 25th percentile through the 95th percentile. This shows the monthly use in CCF, and it shows what that actual monthly bill is currently, and then what the surcharge is, essentially, because the surcharge is only, again, on the flow portion of the monthly bill. So when it comes right down to it, at this point, the average single-family home would be paying about 10 cents extra a day in surcharges for the supplemental supplies and the additional costs associated with running conservation programs. So when we move to the next slide, the next question that the board or the public may have is, well, how does this compare with others in the region? So you can see here that we have the City of San Jose's drought surcharge at $7.13 per 100 cubic feet. And you can see at Alameda County Water District that they're just have there at roughly 80 cents on their surcharge. Contra Costa's at about 80 cents. North Marin, 75 cents. Pleasanton, 65. San Francisco, 48 cents. East Bay MUD's 37 cents. DSRSD at 35 cents and Livermore at 13 cents. These are all slightly different. We tried to put this in an apples to apples comparison, but some of them have flat dollars per CCF. So Alameda County's, Contra Costa County's, DSRSD's, but East Bay MUD and San Francisco both have a percent. So it's the same percent on the amount of water use. San Jose's is really a penalty more than it is a surcharge. You can see that $7.13 is very high when you compare it to the rest of them. And so the way that they're planning to implement that is that there's an allocation that each single family resident is receiving, and that's based on 85% of 2019 use. And if you use more than essentially your allocation, then you would pay that $7.13 on every CCF on top of that. So it's really a penalty more than a surcharge.
It seems like we went down that road a few droughts ago and it didn't work out so well. I hope San Jose has incorporated some of those lessons about how things change in families over time, that like our letter. This seems more like our excessive
use penalty.
It's
Yeah,
kind of a hybrid.
yes.
And just to be clear, the surcharge, 8% surcharge, is just on the volumetric portion.
That's correct.
Of the bill.
It is not on the elevation surcharge. It is not on the monthly charge. I mean, it really is related to the fact that we are buying additional supplemental supplies.
Right. So it's not your bills won't increase by 8%.
No, and so you can see what the impact is of the surcharge by customer usage category. So the 4 CCF, 6, 10, and 24. And so if we were to have added a column, which calculated the monthly surcharge as a percent of the bill, it would vary, of course, by each one of those. But no, it is not 8% on top of the entire bill.
And note, Sophia, even for the high water users, it's only 40 cents extra per day.
Correct.
Can I clarify what is the threshold that triggers the surcharge in San Jose?
That is a good question. Let me see if I have it on my notes.
Well,
I'm not sure.
You said 85% of 2019 use.
85% of 2019 use, but yeah, so you're right. It would just vary based on the family. So depending on what your family's use was, they would look back to see what your 2019 was, and then they would take 85% of that. So per the comments that Director Young made, your family's usage, if your 3 kids came home to live with you and they were gone in 2019, hopefully I hope for themselves that they have some kind of a process by which you can.
There are many problems with that approach, as the district learned in 2008.
I was going to say, wasn't that the 2005 or something like that?
Yeah, I'm disappointed in the company that manages San Jose's, but that we make our own decisions. I was interested just to understand the structure, but I think that the long-term discussions about how we might look at our Prop 218 limitations on cost recovery and how that fits in with our the current penalty rate that we're able to apply and the penalty threshold that we're able to apply for excessive use. Those are not in front of us today, and there's an urgency to be acting. So thanks for clarifying.
Yes. So in terms of next steps, the board, we would ask that the board consider implementation of an 8% stage 2 drought surcharge to be effective on July the 1st. That include that the board would authorize staff to notify customers via our website, the pipeline, social media, and other media about the drought surcharge and changes in regulations in effect, and to add drought expenses to the FY23 budget. So we will be coming back as part of the mid-cycle, but the costs that you see today are what will be part of that. We are planning to begin recruitment of the limited term drought positions so they can be in place as quickly as possible, so that they can be in place, on or soon after July 1, given there is some time that it takes to make all that happen. And also that we would begin work on activities in the water shortage emergency action plan.
Anything further? Any questions, comments? Are we ready to take a vote on this? Okay. I will need a motion first. All right, I got a motion by Director Patterson.
I'll second.
By Director Young. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any abstentions or any nay?
One opposed.
Oppose? Any abstentions? All right, carries 6-1.
Thank you, sir. So next is a discussion on our water shortage emergency action plan. As directed by the board at the last board meeting, we're bringing to you the plan for your consideration. The plan outlines our activities and outreach efforts to help us achieve the 10% mandatory water use reduction goal set by the board. Alice Toohey, Manager of Water Conservation, will begin the discussion.
Thank you, Clifford, and good afternoon, Board President Linney and members of the board. So I'm going to be talking today about our water shortage emergency action plan. We're asking the board to approve this plan today. And as Clifford mentioned, this is our plan for how we're going to get to that 10% goal that the board has set. So just a little bit of background, as I'm sure you're all aware, at the last board meeting, the board did declare a 10% district-wide mandatory water use reduction goal and directed staff to develop this plan. Although I do want to be clear that this is something we've been working on for quite a while. It describes our outreach programs and tools to achieve that 10% reduction goal. And I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about communications and about messaging, since that's obviously a key part of getting our customers to conserve water. So we are starting to work around to figure out what our specific messages are around several key areas. First of all, we're looking for specific, actionable, behavior-based messages that can help our customers to know what we're asking them to do to save water. So some of that stems from our restrictions, so things like not irrigating more than 3 times a week, being careful not to over-irrigate so that they have runoff, being mindful of indoor use, taking shorter showers, fixing leaks, etc. We also want to promote our conservation tools and rebates. We have a number of tools on our website that can help customers manage their water use, and we also think that a drought is a great time for our customers to think about getting rid of their lawns, doing efficiency upgrades. Another important message area is recognizing our super savers. We have a number of customers at East Bay Mud who've already become very efficient in their water use. They're already doing pretty much everything that they can to save water. So we want to make sure to recognize those folks and thank them and ask them to keep up the good work. And then last but by no means least, we want to make sure that we're educating our customers about our own activities to conserve water at East Bay Mud. So that means educating our customers about all the amazing things we're doing in terms of pipeline leak detection and repair. So those key messages do get sort of more specific and tailored when you're talking about specific customer classes. I won't go through all of these, but just to give you a little bit of a flavor of what we're talking about. For example, with single family residential, a big focus is going to be on efficient irrigation, leak detection, mindful indoor water use. Whereas when we're talking about multifamily residential customers, we have kind of 2 separate tracks of messaging. We want to communicate with the actual residents about being careful in terms of their indoor water use, and then also work with building owners and HOAs to improve irrigation in sort of common areas. We do also, of course, want to reach out to commercial customers, industrial, our irrigation-only accounts, and then specifically work with the cities and counties in our service area to provide them with the tools they need to manage their water use and also to work with their residents. And then last but by no means least, for schools, again, working on the actual schools themselves, efficient irrigation, leak detection, and then also providing resources to teachers so that they can help their students understand how to conserve water. So in terms of communication tools, there's a variety of tools and channels that we can use to reach our customers. This includes our usual kind of regular communications channels, things like our home water reports, and you can see a little snippet of a picture in the top left there. That's the top of one of our home water reports. That goes out to every customer, every residential customer for whom we have an email address, and we are always working to try to get more email addresses from our customers. We also can use tools like the customer pipeline. We have our CII quarterly newsletter in the conservation program that reaches commercial customers. And then, of course, we have our IRIS water budgets that go to irrigation accounts. Social media is increasingly becoming an important platform for us, both to communicate with our customers and to try to generate engagement and to actually get folks feeling a little bit more involved. And of course, working with the media, both through our contacts with the local media and then also continuing to coordinate with the state's Save Our Water campaign. We've had a lot of luck working with them over the past year. They've been able to help us set up some interviews and discussions with the press. And at NACWA last week, I did speak to somebody at Save Our Water. They're also working on rolling out more materials in other languages that we could also make use of. And then last but by no means least, webinars, workshops. Now that we are getting to a place where we're trying to do more in-person events, we're looking for opportunities to get out into the community. I do want to mention advertising. We did have an advertising program last year. You might recall our Make Every Drop Count campaign. So we would be looking to expand that this year. So in addition to the print and digital advertising we did last year, we would again look at outdoor advertising, both potentially using our Clear Channel credits for west of Hills, and then also looking for opportunities for outdoor advertising east of Hills. And then we're also exploring some possible partnerships for television and radio to, again, get the word out more broadly. And again, I do want to stress here, we want to make sure we're reaching all of our customers. So a key part of all this is going to be getting materials translated and looking for venues that can reach customers who might speak languages other than English. And we are also looking for opportunities to partner with other agencies locally. There have been conversations among the regional PIOs group about possible regional advertisements, regional ad buys. And then we have had some discussions actually with Dublin San Ramon Services District about some advertising opportunities at the Bishop Ranch City Center that we might partner with them on that. So in addition to the actual communications and outreach, we are looking at some improvements to our water conservation programs. We are looking at some temporary increases in the dollar amounts for certain rebates. For example, our lawn rebate, currently it's 75 cents per square foot or $1.50 if it's for the super rebate or the median rebate. We're looking at potentially increasing that starting July 1st, again, to try to generate interest in those programs. And that both would potentially help us a little bit during the drought, but also in the long term, we think it's important to get more folks converted to water efficient landscapes. We're also looking to accelerate implementation of some new conservation programs that we've been working on. That includes things like a landscape design assistance program. We've definitely heard from customers that sometimes they want to get rid of their lawns, but they don't quite know how to start or what to do instead of that. So we're looking at a program that would provide them with a little bit of design support. Also looking at some programs to complement our CAP program to help our low-income customers be more efficient and save both water and money. We're also looking at programs like we have our Leak Alert program, which our software generates sort of automated alerts when the system sees patterns of high use, and we would be doing some follow-up on those, reaching out to customers who haven't responded. And then also looking at things like just making sure that all the materials in the district store are up to date, considering some new promotional materials for customers, things like lawn signs, things like that. Obviously, enforcing our regulations is also going to be a key part of this plan. So the two big components of our regulations here, Section 28, which is water use during water shortage emergency condition. We do have an existing process for handling water waste complaints. Customers, members of the public, district employees can report water waste to us by email or through our website. We have a web form, and we do go through a process of investigating those complaints and contacting the customers who are responsible. And I'm pleased to say that you know, the majority of our customers, when we contact them and let them know about the water waste, they do take action to fix the situation. Most people don't want to waste water. We also, of course, have our excessive water use penalty ordinance. Over the next week or so, we're going to be doing proactive outreach to customers who've had at least one very high bill over the past year to let them know about the ordinance, just as a heads up. And then we hope that that letter itself will serve as a means of encouraging conservation. And then, of course, the district is working on, you know, just making sure that we're going to be implementing the excessive water use penalty ordinance. So that did go into effect on April 26th, but you know, the customers have one bill cycle where if they have an exceedance, they get a warning, and then at the second exceedance, they would be in violation and have a penalty. In terms of resources, as Sophia mentioned, we will be activating several temporary drought positions. That budget that Sophia went over does include money for advertising and for things like translating materials and, you know, having staffing for events, rebates, etc. And I do just want to mention that additional resources could be requested if the drought does continue or get worse. You know, we might need to come back for additional resources. And just in terms of the schedule, so we're in May. As I mentioned, we are doing that proactive outreach to high users about the excessive water use penalty ordinance. We're also, over May and June, going to be working on fine-tuning our messaging, developing ads and communications tools with the goal of launching our advertising campaign in June, because we know that peak water use starts in July. It's usually July through September, so we want to make sure that we're getting the messaging out there to customers. And then in November, we will report back to the board on conservation savings and the 10% goal. So with that, are there any questions? Yes.
Alice, we get the daily update of our breaks. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're not. So how are you going to be addressing that? Because every drought, when we are telling people to conserve, doing this and that, and a major break occurs in their community, we hear about it. So what is the message going to be when that does happen, so we're all on the same page as much as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I think I would answer two parts. First of all, I think we do want to be proactive, as I mentioned, in terms of doing a better job of telling the story to our customers about our pipeline leak detection and repair program. We have a lot of really amazing technology, you know, satellites, acoustic leak detection, and things that we do. So we've had some conversations internally about, you know, maybe doing some posts on Nextdoor, or, you know, working with the media to try to tell that story a little bit better, so that you know, people have a little bit of that context. And then I think when those actual events happen, I think part of the way we respond is, you know, making it sort of, you know, making it clear to our customers how seriously we take it and how quickly we're responding to it.
So will we on Facebook, LinkedIn, Nextdoor and all that, be putting out there, if somebody detects a leak before we maybe hear about it, here's the number to call, and do we have somebody there who's going to pick it up, and answer it, and be able to dispatch a crew versus, you know, the next morning at 8 or 9 o'clock, people come in and listen to the voicemail messages?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do, I believe, have a phone number that people can call, and I think off hours it directs you to dispatch.
It's a 24.
Oh, sorry.
It's a 24/7 number that the customers can call, that is manned by a person that'll take the call. The other thing, Director Coleman, that we do is when they do report just not, you know, a big main break, but just seeps on the ground, we make sure that, you know, we'll get to those, you know, as quickly as possible based within our timeline, so they don't see this street seep for an extended period of time. And then the last thing that we do when we make the repair, we do have to flush it for water quality, and we have signs that we put out there to let the customers know that we're not just wasting the water. This has to be done to clean the pipes before we put it back into service.
So along those lines, I know this has happened in the past. If there's a park or something nearby, to somehow direct the water to be used versus going down into the sewer system. I mean, that may help a little bit in terms of that, and I would hope that on our webpage, I should take a look, that it's the very thing when you click on EBMUD, if you detect if you detect a leak, here's the number to call 24/7. So it's very there and up front, because as Frank was saying, sometimes our system could be daunting. And so if it's right there as you pop up EBMUD on the webpage, that may make it easier for people to respond and let us know.
Sure, I can check and make sure that that is prominent on our website. And I don't know, Dave, if you want to speak a little bit more about the flushing and the disposal of that water. I know that's something that we do get questions from customers from time to time.
We do, and Alice, we're opportunistic. We can do it for our pipeline installation projects where we can plan the timing, or if we're doing a reservoir drain. But for pipeline repairs, it would be very difficult to coordinate with anybody for beneficial use because of the timing. So in the last drought, we did that, and we can continue to do it this drought.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions? Director Young?
One thought I had around the leak issue or the main breaks issue. I know in the last drought, we saw quite an escalation of main breaks, and that was prior to implementing our more sophisticated approach to understanding what's going on. Do we have anything that's helping us present that story? Or actually, I guess the question is, are we trending down now? Are we seeing the same escalation of main breaks due to the drought or not? Or, is there something that we can show that in a more, it's not a reactive, it's not like a defensive way, but to say, we recognize that during droughts we'll have, there's the potential exists for a larger number of main breaks due to drier soils. Maybe it's too complicated a message, I don't know, but if we see that we've actually reduced the occurrence of main breaks due to what we're doing, then I think that's a decent story for some outlet. I'm not sure what outlet. It's not that sort of, there's thousands of gallons pouring out of my street right now. Yeah, but it's way better than it was 8 years ago. That's probably not what you want to say, right? But
yeah, and I don't think we can say definitively if it's changed, Director Young. We still see more breaks during the dry periods, and I don't think we can say with any certainty that that's changed just yet.
okay. Hopefully though.
Are there other questions?
What's is there a budget number that's associated with this particular plan, and how much is that?
Yeah, I think I could ask. Yeah, and that includes, I think the majority of that is for those 9 temporary positions that we would be activating.
Okay, I didn't get that number.
I think it's 1.9 million.
1.9 million.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
So we would need the board to approve the plan.
Okay, I will take a motion then. Motion by McIntosh, seconded by Patterson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously. You sold us on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And I just have 2 more items. The first is a brief COVID update, and Dave Briggs, Director of Operations and Maintenance, will provide that update.
Okay, thank you, Clifford. Good afternoon, President Linney, members of the board. I just have a few minor points to brief you on, and thanks for queuing this up. So looking at slide 2, as we have for quite some time, tracking the positivity rate, the positive cases rate in our local counties. Now, this data is only updated through last week. The data is continuing to rise, as you probably know. But for reference, of course, when it's plotted against the Omicron spike, it looks pretty minor. But in reality, it's just as significant as the Delta variant surge that we had last summer. So we are in a surge, make no doubt about it. But a couple of observations to pass on. The hospitalization rate is still relatively low. Now, the hospitalization rate will lag. It's a lagging indicator. It will lag behind these health metrics. It's low now. There's no guarantee it will remain low, but it is low right now and hopefully will remain low. The lower graphic shows our district positives. It's showing 10 here for the month of May. Unfortunately, that number's up to 20. We've had 10 in the last week or so. But also would note that we have had no employee-to-employee transmissions for months since the Omicron surge several months ago. None that I'm aware of, and I would know. So no one is seriously ill with COVID right now. So a lot of this is predictable. That's last observation. We track the wastewater data, which is the best leading indicator we have, and I'm sure Eileen, tracks it just as much as I do. I think we're at the plateau. I think we're at the peak right now. Hopefully we'll see a decline. That's just based on previous experience. And then just to update you on the latest guidance, nothing has really changed at the federal or state level in over a month. Alameda County remains adherent to a more conservative protocol when it comes to quarantine. That is that you can only avoid quarantine if you're asymptomatic and you're vaccinated after being exposed. Whereas outside of Alameda County and statewide, you can avoid quarantine if you're merely asymptomatic. So we're following the more conservative protocol as we always do. Last week we did suspend our testing program for our unvaccinated employees based on going several weeks without getting a positive, but we were clear with employees that this was just a suspension, and if rates in the community rose again significantly, we would reconstitute that testing, but for the moment we're suspended. And otherwise everything else is the same in terms of safety protocols at the district. And the last thing I would note is we always try to stay on the front foot. We always try to anticipate what's coming. So we're looking at all the data. In terms of indoor masking, it's obviously still in effect. Not the right time to remove that protocol right now. BART has reconstituted their face covering policy. The city of San Jose has just reconstituted for city workers in the city of San Jose. So some people are going backwards. We have remained constant throughout. We have shifted, or we will next week, shift our on-site testing program, as I mentioned last update, to an off-site program where employees can get tested to get back to work or avoid quarantine if we direct them there. So those are just some minor changes. Otherwise, we're just kind of in a stay the course mode right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And the last thing, the monthly report is attached, and I can answer any questions. And I don't want to curse anything going forward, but just note, since Director Young asked the question, we had 35 main breaks in April. And that's all I have.
All right, any questions? Clifford? All right, then we're on to reports and director comments. Committee reports, the minutes from the April 26, 2022 Sustainability, Energy, and Finance Administration Committee meetings were included in your packet. We will now receive reports from this morning's Planning and the Legislative Human Resources Committees. Director Young.
Okay. We had 3 items on our agenda this morning in the Planning Committee. We took them out of order in order to give the Recreation report top billing, since they had patiently waited for, I think, 4 meetings to provide their full report. Talked about the couple pilot programs, one allowing unpermitted users on the De La Viega Trail that's near the Orinda BART station, another pilot on having our CAP customers get trail permits. Both of those are still in process. We also have up in the upper watershed some what are we calling park model replacing a little hotel at Comanche, as well as trail reports on use by horses and hikers. And sadly, a report about a illegal trail in the East Bay watershed that we're requesting staff are taking action on, but we're asking them to also coordinate with the Bicycle Trail Council of the East Bay and others to see if we can enlist our bike allies in addressing. We then heard a report on some modeling that's being done to look at our long-term infrastructure, resources needed for long-term infrastructure. That report was accepted as information, but there was significant discussion about how to think about contracting out. And then finally, we had a quick update on the new service center at Willow Street down in West Oakland, and plans to build that to handle our expanded rebuild program out in the central part of the district.
All right, thank you. Director
Trying
McIntosh.
to make it an attractive neighbor.
Yes.
All right, Director McIntosh.
I provided my report during Marlene's presentation, but I would like to add one item, and that we did have an update on our diversity and inclusion program, and we put over the issue of, what did we put over, John?
I think you guys just considered Peralta in the afternoon.
Peralta, the internship, yes.
We voted on that and,
Yes, during consent calendar.
okay. Thank you. For other items for future consideration, please submit those to the general manager. Director comments. Do we have any director comments? Frank?
The veterans group that in Castro Valley really got hit hard this past week because we lost 3 of the greatest generation. And it was like one after another, with the most recent being Mickey Ganich, a 102-year-old Pearl Harbor survivor. Before him, Peter Shantz, who was 98 years old. Mickey was in the Navy for 22 years and actually served as a senior chief quartermaster. Peter Shantz was in the military police, and Glenn Barth was 100 years old, and he was a captain in the Army. And so, you know, when we think about how we are here today, I would ask that we all remember that it was that greatest generation that helped us to get here. And I would ask that the minutes reflect these comments.
Thank you, Frank. Any other director comments? Bill?
Just one thing. I got a couple of calls this week with people with concerns, and I believe I left my package in the car that the Oakland Grand Lake Theater is going to have the justice on trial. That was the Black Panther Party, as you know, focused on the trial. And it is scheduled, I believe, for the 22nd. I will check that, and if I'm wrong, I'll send you an email, but there are tickets available if anybody wants to see that. I am in it as one of the characters. Some of you don't remember, but following that era and during it is when I became the first grand jury foreperson in Alameda County.
All right, thank you, Bill. The next meeting of the board will be held on Tuesday, May 24th, 2022 at 1:15 p.m. Look forward to seeing everyone. This meeting is now adjourned.